course, following that top story of this evening, we're continuing to get reaction to Johnny Clegg's death. And joining me now is music journalist Brokenshaw. Sean, thanks a lot for joining us this evening. Difficult time, especially for not only the Clegg family, but really rather for South Africans, having lost a significant icon in the music industry.
Well, it's the family of South Africa, and the family of South Africa that is what we call the new South Africa. One of its first members will always be remembered as Johnny Clegg. Johnny Clegg loved journeys, and Johnny Clegg had a metaphor of journeys, and a lot of times with the journeys that other people took, like the songs about migrant workers, for example, but he himself was on the most incredible journey, and he gave us the privilege of opening our eyes so that we could also journey with him. And that's why he's so important, more than just a musician. Musically, he created new types of sounds. He cross-pollinated markets that were very difficult to reach from either side. So musically, he is an absolute genius and legend. But as a socially significant South African and as a human being and as an example, he showed us what it takes to have courage to take a step. You know, whether it was when he was first here, he arrived here as a young teenager, as a young boy, and he was different to other white South African kids because he didn't have the same upbringing and conditioning up to that point. So he heard the sound of the street musicians on the Sunday afternoon in the leafy suburbs of Joburg, and he didn't get annoyed by it. He didn't listen to what other people said. He sought it out. He went on this journey to find out what this music was, because it was something that was new and exciting. And that significance of him doing that and coming up with Jaluka and then Savuka is basically he was a pathfinder for many like him, many like me in my demographic. Johnny Clegg led the way through a very, very dark place for a lot of people from many sides of the spectrum. And he, right up until the point, I knew he was going to die, but I'm shocked at this point because he seemed to be so much bigger than life and so much more vibrant and just so much more of everything. How can Johnny die? It's impossible. He's always been part of my life from when I first heard him and I understood why I'm an African. It was his music that did it for me. And because of that, I think my experience is very common to a lot of people. It goes beyond just being a South African music legend. He's a global music legend, and he's also a global example of how it is possible with just curiosity and humility and incredible courage, how it is possible to bring people together. And that's the journey that Johnny wanted to take, and he did it. You know, he's probably one of the most important figures, South Africans, in many of our lives, and not just musical figures either, for those reasons.
Well, he definitely personifies the spirit of the great heart. I mean, we're speaking here about an individual that was able to transcend all color lines across colors, creeds, nationalities, you name it. And perhaps, I mean, you're going back to his history, I mean, owing it obviously to his English father, Zimbabwean mother, and the stepfather who played a very vital role as he was a journalist, a crime journalist at that particular moment in time, and who then went and exposed Johnny to the life in the township. But it says something, doesn't it? Because he could have been exposed to life in the township and simply decided to be ignorant and simply decided to ignore the realities, but instead he chose a different path.
Or just go the comfortable route of young white South African males at that point. And it wasn't only the music, it was the dancing as well and the stick fighting. It took a serious amount of sand in his boots to take himself down to the hostel and partake in those dance troupes. And he still, you know, his last concert at the Dome, the very first dance troupe that he was allowed to join, they came on stage to honor him. And it showed you, and we saw people from all parts of his life, and it showed you that they still completely and totally adored him and understood with clarity what he stood for and bought into it. And because of that, I mean, he's more, he is a unifying force, but not in the way that we paid lip service, you know, and, well, I mean, lip service is necessary, especially in the 90s of, you know, the days of the Rainbow Nation, and we all believed, and it was important that we did that. But his amount of change that he brought to this country is far, far deeper than that, because he started far earlier. And he did the things that were dangerous. He did the things that you just wouldn't think of doing at that point, coming from where he came from.
And obviously, we've got South African musicians, I do believe about 50 of them were honouring him in 2018, really just paying tribute to the music.
Oh, that is incredible, the crossing. Now, if you have access, if anyone's listening and has access to YouTube, you have to watch this. And you just see how much he meant. You see the love in the faces of our greatest musicians around today. There is everyone from David Kramer to Corin Zoid to Fusi to Victor Masondo, just everyone across the spectrum universally got Johnny, loved Johnny, and bought into Johnny.
And not only bought into him, but bought into his story, bought into the patriotism, bought into the altruism. I mean, we're talking about this individual that was an activist, an individual who, when the music actually was barred from being played during the apartheid era simply because of the genre and the nature of the music in itself, it didn't stop him. He continued and he persisted on, which made him really this living icon that we speak about, who literally transcends across the globe and is relevant to all individuals.
Yes, and he didn't just play the guitar, he walked the walk as well. You know, the other things that Johnny Clegg did outside of music are incredibly impressive. He was a lecturer, and he saw himself as an anthropologist, first and foremost. He was an academic. He ran programs for people to benefit people. Not necessarily, I'm Johnny Clegg, I'm going to do it through my music, and that is obvious, and that is nation-changing. But little things as well. You know, Johnny was someone who was ultimately a human being. The humility of Johnny Clegg was the thing that made us believe that, you know, he would be here forever. But he's not.
Absolutely. And how many of us actually understand the fact that this individual was an author who actually published a book called Ukubuyisa Isidumbu? I mean, to actually even name that title, Ukubuyisa Isidumbu, just really speaking about migrant workers, says something about his roots, his rootedness in literally being this white Zulu man.
Yes, indeed. I mean, he totally got the fact that we are scatterlings of Africa, all of us, and you know, we should be moving in the same direction and pulling together. And that's all he was saying. You know, let's go on a journey together. Let's just wander off in totally different directions and work against each other. It's the normality in which he saw things and the simplicity in which he saw things made it very clear to him. It's very easy. You don't have to admire yourself in anything but simply what your heart wants to do and what everyone wants. And that ability to find simplicity in a very, very complex situation made him also the linguist he was. You know, the fascination he had with finding the simple truth behind something that seemed incomprehensible, but it was always there if you saw it with the right eyes.
I must actually say that as you're speaking, I'm just watching the images of him, and there's something that speaks true around the nature of authenticity. And I think sometimes in life and as people, we lack authenticity in the way in which we carry ourselves, in the way in which we articulate our truth. But really, when it comes to the truth that Johnny Clegg actually held, was the fact that authentically he understood the plight of the black South African individual, most importantly, the black South African migrant worker who had to leave his family, come into the towns, and have to establish this life under terrible circumstances and still be a normal functioning human being and man.
Yeah, and he didn't only see that side of the journey, he saw the dignity of it as well. He was a Maskandi, and he embraced that whole tradition of traveling music. And he made it into something that wasn't just poo-pooed as just being the sound that you hear, you know, on a Sunday afternoon, the sound of a homemade guitar. He turned it into something that is far bigger than a song. It's a story of a life. And because of that, he gave that journey, that undignified journey up to the gold mines, because you simply had to, without a family and live in a hostel. He made that, he gave it a dignity. He recognized it for what it was, the humanity in it.
Well, Sean, we're going to leave our conversation there for this evening, but thank you so much for joining us.